The transfer portal window is almost closed. Will there be any more movement for the Tigers? We've got the answers. It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making it your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So the spring transfer portal window is set to close. Now, that doesn't mean that's the deadline on Friday for players to make their decision. Friday is just the last opportunity for players to enter the portal. And so far, only 2 LSU players have entered their name. John Emery Jr. is one. We knew that he was going to play a 7th season, not return to LSU. The other is a former walk-on wide receiver in Javen Nicholas, who had earned a scholarship but only played sparingly throughout his career. Now is going to go seek an opportunity to get more playing time in his remaining eligibility. So could we see more Tigers hit the portal by Friday? I asked that question of our friend Shay Dixon from On3, the Bengal Tiger, who covers recruiting and roster movement as well as anybody. Here's what he had to say about any more Tigers hitting the road.
Well, from speaking with sources, there was the thought that a couple of guys maybe could enter, and it would still kind of fall under how Brian Kelly described it as what would be a quiet portal season, spring portal season, relative to, I guess, the past or how some other teams are going through things. And so far that's been the case. I think the women's basketball portal is about to close. Maybe that's tomorrow night, then men, and then Friday would be football for men. So by the end of this week, the portal is kind of wrapped up completely. But football-wise, keeping an eye on if a couple of guys enter. And, Matt, I think it's something you've talked about plenty, but right now with guys who are backups, and none of these guys would be starters from names I've heard. None of them are guys who just transferred in, but rather guys who are battling to play, kind of second-team guys, but still, when the agents are involved, they're tossing around, hey, look, if you went to this school, which you can't go into any SEC schools at this point, they're past that transfer deadline date, but this school X would be able to offer you an NIL package worth blank, and that would be worth more than you currently have. And right now we're in those final days, they hope, of the wild, wild west before Deloitte becomes a third party, that any NIL deal over $600 or whatever goes through them to look at and see if it's got legitimacy, and then rev share, which I think is going to curtail a lot of at least the massive numbers that are way beyond market value, or however you would kind of perceive an NIL package or deal rolling out. And right now, there isn't that. So I think a lot of guys are saying, hey, look, this is my final chance to make my push for maybe more. But I think that LSU's at a spot where, since Austin Thomas came here, what was it, Matt, a year ago? Maybe a little more?
Yeah.
And since they've kind of shuffled up Bayou traditions and had some new leadership there, and I think all of that put together has put them in a spot where, look, we saw Brian Kelly open up about it, the kind of model of NFL and, knowing what market value is and having each position assigned a different kind of number next to it of what that value is, and they'll follow that. And if a backup says, I want this, and that's worth more than, everybody on the defense is making or starters are making, they're probably not going to budge. It's going to become a point where, hey, that's a business decision on our end to say no, just like it's a business decision on your end to say, hey, look, it's this or I'm out of here type of situation. It's like the Nico stuff, but not like it at all, right, Matt? Like, it's the type of stuff in the portal that kind of happens at every school right now that you just don't hear about. So no starting quarterbacks or anything like that or trying to bail out of here or anything of that nature. And, hey, look, that's probably the best thing is stay out of the news in the spring portal window.
It sure sounds like LSU is going to escape this portal window without losing anyone else. And you heard Shay say it there. And I love talking to Shay. He's so thorough. But you heard him say that there were a couple of people that staff members had told him they were maybe on the fence, and ultimately guys that decided to say. I think a big part of that is you've got buy-in and also a belief that the team's going to be really good as well. And that even if you're a backup, LSU is spending and has a plan to spend in this revenue share era. One thing that I've told you, I know there is a ledger that LSU has for how they're going to break down their entire budget from NIL and the blended number from NIL and revenue share by position group and then broken down by player. And when you're spending the type of money LSU is, everyone is going to make something significant. So if you're a backup, you'd ask yourself, where could I go to make more? And would I rather stay at LSU and have a chance to be on a great team and continue to develop? And apparently a lot of guys are choosing that option right now. Now, the other side of it is the big question. Is there anyone out there, a position that LSU might be looking to add as this portal window goes along?
Well, we knew that D-line, D-tackle, look, they'll always take them, but it's such a premium position that, of course, you're always on the lookout for it. And we saw it how kind of that went in the spring portal window a year ago, and they knew, hey, look, let's do all of our heavy lifting in this first portal window. Let's do it by signing high school guys, retaining guys on the roster, keeping the Don McKinleys and everybody put. And then if you have to add any D-line transfers, you can. But just not a ton of big-name DTs have gone in. I think linebackers, safety, there's spots where you would say, sure, you could take an extra guy there. But more than anything, Matt, I wonder, and this is at the balancing act, if you've got, without naming position, I'd be like a couple DTs or safeties or linebacker, whatever it might be, you've got a couple of guys that say, hey, look, we may or may not go in. We do want you to stay. You've got until Friday to announce. Kind of the last thing you're wanting to do is say, hey, look, let's take this other guy, bring him in, who may or may not even be as good as those guys, and say, all right, you're added. And then those guys say, oh, well, look, if you're continuing to add guys, I'm probably going to play less, so I'm out now. So when Brian Kelly said they really like their roster right now, I think that's what kind of the big point he's making is we'll choose and kind of work with what we've got, in this final stretch of the portal window and any NIL deals that need to be redone or conversations that need to be had about where I'm at on the depth chart and how much playing time I might get and all of that. Is they'll deal with all that and kind of work through that before saying, hey, let's go out and grab a new guy at that spot. But if they had some position where a guy or two both go in and now you're down, then, yeah, you've got to turn around and start exploring. And by Friday, you have to have your name in. But obviously that is not when the portal ends. No one has to be committed by then. So we'll see if after Friday they suddenly say, hey, look, we ended up losing more than Javen Nicholas and John Emery, and it was at this position. Let's go ahead and address it.
The thing that's really interesting to keep in mind there, two things. Number one, numbers. So in this portal cycle, so for this year, right? So if you look back to the December portal window, LSU had 16 guys come in, right? They signed either the top first or second ranked portal class in the December window. Texas Tech was up there. Kind of depends on what scouting service you look at. But the point is LSU they signed a great class in December with 16 players coming in, but they lost 21 in that portal window. So 16 in, 21 out. Now, of course, it's going to be offset because you have a big high school class coming in, some early enrollees, some will be here in June. But a year ago in December, you added two. Remember, you added the punter Blake Oxendorf and you added JVR Suggs, the defensive lineman from Grand Valley State, but you had 8 players go out last year in the spring portal window. So the fact that you've only had 2 go out so far, one was a former walk-on and one is John Emery, who we knew that's sort of an extenuating circumstance. It's pretty interesting that you've only had those 2 so far. And as far as what Shay was saying, which is interesting as well about, especially defensive tackle, there not being a really elite player go in. Right now, the top uncommitted defensive tackle or defensive lineman in the portal is Bernard Gooden. This is according to 24/7. I know On3 has their rankings as well. But Bernard Gooden, who's a 4-star, 6'1", 280 from South Florida, the University of South Florida. So you're talking about a guy that has played 2 years at South Florida, was a 3-star, coming out of high school in Montgomery, Alabama. Not a super big guy, but that's the highest rate. So you look at it and you go, okay, well, you added Sadir Mitchell. You've got 2 freshmen from a year ago, and Ahmad Bro and Don McKinley, who are both stepping up. You're bringing Jacoby and Guillory back. You added 4 freshmen that you're really high on. Like, do you really need to go get that guy? Like, is that the impact guy you're looking for? Doesn't seem like it. Again, if you had a guy that was a 3-year starter at a Power 5 school that's a plug-and-play, no doubter, like, that's someone that I think you'd look at. Doesn't seem like that's what's out there. So you don't go add just for the sake of adding. If that no doubt dominant player were there, you'd consider doing it. But that player hasn't been there so far in this spring portal window. So as a result, LSU hasn't gone shopping. Friday is the deadline for players to enter the portal. If any new names pop in and we hear any rumblings, we'll talk about it here on Locked On LSU. Your team every day. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. We are inching closer to the start of the 2025 NFL draft, and Mel Kiper has released his final big board. If you're not familiar, that's not a that's not a mock draft. It's just a ranking of the top 150 prospects in the entire draft, regardless of position. And some things are not surprising. Travis Hunter, number 1 overall. Abdul Carter right there at the top as well. Interestingly enough, though, Mel Kiper has 6 LSU Tigers on that list, 6 in the top 150 in this draft. The one that we all know, of course, at the top is Will Campbell, and Mel Kiper has him ranked number 9 overall in this upcoming draft. So what's fascinating about Will Campbell, and we're going to see Will make some history for LSU. I think this is something that maybe hasn't been talked about enough so far. But Will Campbell is poised right now to become the 4th pick of the draft overall. If you look at the absolute latest odds, and candidly, this does change and it is very fluid as information continues to pop. But, I'll tell you this very candidly. On Thursday last week, I went and had lunch it was at Phil's Oyster Bar, and I was sitting down having lunch, and Will Campbell was walking out. So was Miles Frazier, by the way, with the New England Patriots brass, including Mike Vrabel. The head coach of the Patriots isn't flying to Baton Rouge a week before the draft if they're not really interested in that player. So word gets out, and now Will Campbell is minus 380 to be the 4th pick of the draft. That means you'd have to bet $380 to win 100 if you're not up with betting parlance. The next closest is Ashton Genty at plus 500. So it is a massive, runaway lead that Will Campbell is going to be the number 1 pick of the New England Patriots, number 4 pick overall, barring something dramatically unforeseen in the draft before that point. And whether it's at 4 or a little behind, we're going to watch LSU make Will Campbell make some history. LSU, I don't think many people know this. This storyline hasn't been talked about enough. Will Campbell will become the first offensive lineman taken in round 1, but an LSU offensive lineman taken in round 1 since Allan Fanaka back in 1998. Fanaka is the last LSU offensive lineman to be taken in the first round, and he went 26th overall. Now, the asterisk is Lyle Collins would have been a first-round pick in 2015. He had a great season in 2014. When he returned for his senior year, he was poised to be a first-round pick. And if you remember, in the week leading up to that draft, a former girlfriend of Collins tragically was murdered. And Collins was interviewed as a person of interest, never charged with anything. It was completely exonerated, never had any connection whatsoever. But because he was a person of interest and that overlapped with the draft, he went undrafted. So Lyle would have been a first-round pick, but for that, he went on to have a great career. And you know, it was as good a story, as good as ending as it could have had, considering the situation. But Will Campbell is going to become the highest drafted offensive lineman in LSU history. And by the way, Allan Fanaka is the only first-round offensive lineman in LSU football history. It probably is going to blow people's minds. They did have an offensive lineman in 1965 in the AFL draft named Dave McCormick go 7th overall in the AFL draft. But in the NFL draft and in the modern era of 67 on, the only first-round draft pick LSU's had on the offensive line is Allan Fanaka in 1998. He went 26. So Will Campbell is going to become the highest drafted LSU offensive lineman in the history of the program. And what a great honor that'll be for what is arguably the greatest offensive lineman that has ever put on the purple and gold. So it'll be a lot of fun. You'll watch history on Thursday night where Will Campbell hears his name called, and it'll very likely happen 4th overall to the New England Patriots. There were 2 other offensive linemen on the list from LSU, Miles Frazier and Emory Jones. Now, Emory Jones was 85th overall, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with Emory Jones here in this draft and where he might land. He'll be a day 2 guy, and you know, he's a guy who started 36 of the 38 games he played in his LSU career, started them all at right tackle, very likely projects as a guard at the next level. And boy, he has put out good tape, was great in the Senior Bowl, and had a really good combine and pro day as well. So that's a likely day 2 situation for Emory Jones. Miles Frazier at 106. Frazier made 36 starts at, Frazier was an All-American at FIU, transferred to LSU in 2022, made 50 career starts over 5 seasons in college football, 38 as an LSU Tiger. So those are the offensive linemen. The one to keep an eye on that could be the big surprise, however, is Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor checked in on Mel Kiper's big board, number 41 overall. He has been a dramatic riser. He ran a 4.65 in the 40 at his pro day. He had 28 bench press reps of 225. Which, by the way, both of those would have been second among tight ends at the combine had he gone to participate at the combine. So a guy that tested exceptionally well at his pro day, a guy that has great pedigree, certainly is going to interview exceptionally well with all of his interviews. And so you're seeing Mason Taylor rise up draft boards. Now, Mel Kiper has him 41 on his big board and as a projected, early day 2 pick. But I'll remind you what happened in the 2020 draft with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, where Kansas City was picking 32nd. They had the last pick of round number 1, and Clyde was on the board. And to the surprise of many, Kansas City took Clyde because Patrick Mahomes wanted him. That was a very good football team that didn't have a lot of needs, but that was a versatile offensive player that they liked. And so they knew he wouldn't be there at the end of round 2, so they took him there. And the other benefit of taking a player in round 1, of course, is you get the 5th-year option on a rookie contract. So that means if a team loves Mason Taylor and they're picking late in round 2 and think Taylor's not going to be there, maybe it's a thing where you pull the trigger on him late in round 1, because not only do you get the guy you want, but you're also going to get a 5th-year option on him on the rookie contract. So it's another year before you have to pay him the second contract, provided he gets there. So that's something we see pretty commonly in the 20s picks in the NFL draft, of course, up to 32, where sometimes there'll be guys that are maybe early day 2 picks that actually jump into round 1 because the team doesn't think that player will be on the board at the back of round 2 and wants that extra year of control. So Mason Taylor's one to watch on Thursday to see if, in fact, there's a team that really loves him that might actually jump up and pull the trigger on him earlier in the draft and maybe be a first rounder. There were 2 defensive players on Kiper's big board. It was LSU's 2 defensive ends, Savion Jones, 115, and then Braden Swinson 7 spots later at 122. So those are just the players on Kiper's big board in the top 150. We could certainly see more Tigers come off the board. Zy Alexander, we're expecting, would likely hear his name called somewhere in the draft. Probably a late day 3 type prospect, but a guy that could hear his name called. Same with someone like Garrett Dellinger, who might be a day 3 pick as well. So we'll keep an eye. Gio Paez, there's a team that could love his work ethic, and we'll see if he maybe hears his name called. Greg Penn is another guy who, in the right situation, could play very well at the next level. So the Tigers, we're assuming, will have at least 6 players drafted, and it could be even more, but Mel Kiper's got 6 LSU Tigers on his big board in the top 150 overall in the draft. It's going to be a dream come true for a lot of LSU players starting on Thursday night. And it'll start with Will Campbell, who is very likely going to be the 4th overall pick to the New England Patriots. Okay, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. We'll wrap up with some potentially incredible news for the Tiger baseball team. That's next here on Locked on LSU, your team every day. One of the biggest gets that Jay Johnson had in the most recent transfer portal cycle was Devin Sheeran. And I say that figuratively and literally. The figurative part is that Sheeran was the number 8 overall prospect in the entire transfer portal. He's a right-handed pitcher who really exploded from Mount St. Mary's and started throwing 100 miles an hour. He just had this very dramatic development, wasn't very highly recruited, goes to Mount St. Mary's, and he ends up striking out 100 as a freshman, strikes out 109 batters in 70 innings. It was incredible. And then in the offseason, he just catapulted. So Baseball America ranked him the number 8 transfer in the entire transfer portal. And he lands at LSU. And I said both figuratively and literally. Well, the literal part is Devin Sheeran is 6'5", 245 pounds. So you're talking about another giant pitcher that LSU has to go along with guys like Chase Shores, who's 6'8", and Maverick Rizzi, who's 6'9", and the rest of those guys that are massive. Well, the unfortunate part for Devin Sheeran is that this past summer, he tore his ACL playing a pickup basketball game in a non-baseball related injury, tore his ACL. And so that was supposed to put him on the shelf for the entire season. Well, Jay Johnson was asked about Devin Sheeran a few weeks ago and how his recovery was going, and he was a little nondescript. Now, in fairness, Jay doesn't really talk about injuries. That's his preference. Even when Chase Shores was injured as a freshman, Jay never really disclosed that he tore his UCL and was having Tommy John as long as that season went along. So that's just something that is Jay's preference, and he doesn't like to talk about injuries, so he doesn't. Even all throughout this season with Gavin Guidry's back injury, until they made the decision to shut Gavin Guidry down and have that procedure, there was no update on Gavin Guidry because Jay didn't want to give an update because he's very coy about those things. That's his prerogative as the head coach of the program. But you can't hide 6'5", 250 throwing a flat ground session before LSU played Northwestern State. So Jay was nondescript about Devin Sheeran. And then on Tuesday, when LSU was getting ready to play Northwestern State out at Alec Box Stadium, TV cameras caught Devin Sheeran in the outfield throwing out of his windup a flat ground session to a crouching catcher. I'm not saying that we're going to see Devin Sheeran this year, but what I will say is a year ago, Chase Shores, who was recovering from Tommy John, had continued to progress and had begun throwing bullpens and was getting closer to being ready to go. And had LSU won the Chapel Hill Regional, Jay Johnson later hinted at the fact that Chase Shores would likely have been available for the Super Regional and for Omaha had LSU gotten there. Now, LSU was eliminated in Chapel Hill despite being in the driver's seat there and needing North Carolina had to come back and beat them twice, which they did. But nevertheless, it was a thing where they were going to use him late in the season. And maybe, just maybe, it might be a situation where if Devin Sheeran can give you anything this year, you take it. And you might say, well, why would you blow a redshirt year? The bottom line is for guys like that, they're not going to stay 4 years in school. Now, Sheeran could redshirt and keep a redshirt year, but in the same way that Chase Shores, as soon as he's draft eligible, like this year, even despite the issues he's had, there's going to be a major league team that's going to draft him and pay him a lot of money because they look at 6'8", sitting, mid upper 90s with a wipeout slider. And they're going to go, I can teach that guy command. I can refine that. I can't teach 6'8" to throw 95. You know what I mean? So he's going to go. Same thing with Devin Sheeran next summer. So the thought is, if you're not going to get him to stay for a 4th year and you can get anything at all out of him this year and then have him ready to roll next year, you do it. Again, I don't want to be too presumptive, and I'm certainly not predicting that it's going to happen. But it's certainly a story worth watching when he's out there in uniform, throwing a flat ground with all the world to see before LSU plays Northwestern State. So file it away. Devin Sheeran, maybe, just maybe, could have an impact for LSU in this 2025 baseball season. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On LSU. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, go check out Locked On NFL Draft as your favorite collegiate players get ready for the next level. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, if you are on podcasts, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.